What did you have to unlearn from your parents? Viewer edition.
Story 1. For me, it was the whole love thing. I mean, when they gave me advice on romantic relationships, it was actually mostly great advice. However, when it came to friendships and familial love, it was a wreck. First, because they only addressed rarely, and when they did, it was utter, very toxic stuff. To make a long story short, telling a kid that she shouldn't get attached too much to her best friend because if the city flooded, that friend would pick to save her sister over her, aka me, which is technically correct, but a pretty messed up thing to tell a kid. And there's, of course, the fact that kids learn by emulating their parents' behavior, so I internalized and normalized all sorts of toxic ideas about love. So I turned very emotionally dependent, and with tons of separation anxiety and fear of abandonment while growing up, I had no idea how to establish normal, healthy friendships. I also came to not care about my extended family in the slightest. My relationship with my nuclear family is also very broken. For years, I tried to justify their whole now I love you, now I don't thing. So by the time I got myself a girlfriend and friends who could understand my situation better, it was really a shock for me to learn that love isn't conditional and that rather than a scorching flame, love of any kind is more like a slow burning fire. Love is meant to give you stability and comfort, not to keep you on the verge of a panic attack. Of course, romantic love has passion added in the mix, but that's the thing. Passion and intensity is there to spice it up, not to completely overtake the meal, so to speak. Oof, yeah, I think a lot of people have a lot of, wrong ideas about different kinds of love, and I'm no expert on this stuff, but really what the OP is saying here is pretty solid advice that I think a lot of folks could learn from. So, yeah, listen to them. Story 2. My parents taught me to come to a rolling stop at stop signs. For those who don't know, a rolling stop is where you slow down but don't come to a complete stop at a stop sign. The way you can tell you came to a complete stop is when you feel the car jerk back slightly. Then wait for a couple seconds, then go. I flunked my first go at my driver's test with the DMV, with that being one of the major factors as to why. Ever since then, I would come to a complete stop at every stop sign, even if other drivers behind me got mad. Although in all my years of driving, I haven't seen that. However, there are some times when you do need to do a rolling stop. Myself and many other motorists just has to deal with that yesterday, in fact, when we were hit by a snowstorm that dumped 8 inches of snow on us. The roads were covered, so in order to maintain traction, we'd have to come to a rolling stop instead of a complete one. But in most cases, just come to a complete stop. You'll avoid getting in trouble with the law that way. Look, if we want to start going over all the ways in which people don't obey the rules of the road and just do whatever's close to the law, that's going to be the whole video, honestly. The roads are a wild place, but yeah, I would say this is a pretty important one. Just getting used to fully stopping. Just do it. It's going to cost you what, an extra second or two? Are you really that busy?
Story 3. Concerning Story 5 from the original video, about the abuse going on in another apartment but grandma and family refusing to interfere, well done to the OP for breaking the mold in this situation and anyone else that faces their own fears to help someone else. This is a perfect example of the bystander effect, a social psychological theory that describes how in a situation where there are a number of witnesses, it's well documented that people choose not to interfere in the hope/assumption that someone else will. The more witnesses there are, the less likely it will end up reported at all. I think this is more likely to occur when the event witnessed is socially uncomfortable. If it's something like a car accident, then I think people would have less issue reporting it. I think upbringing will have an impact too. I hope OP and anyone reading this can check their own behavior and teach their own families that it is okay to call for help for other people if they're concerned about them. It's not grassing on someone. Any interference is done out of compassion and concern rather than mean-spirited. And it's so important to act because they might be the only person that will. They could save a life by stepping up. Story 4. Not really taught, but I'm 18, about to be 19 in the next few weeks, and my mom had several poor relationships, like two. One with my father, which ended with them splitting and me having a divided family and home. Second one was with a man who emotionally hurt her, but actually hurt her physically a few times. After standing up to this 6'3" burly dude at age 13, my mom would always turn to me for help. So much so, I was literally giving relationship advice despite never being in one at that point. Eventually, it dawned on me that what my mom is doing does the exact opposite. I eventually got to the point where I started falling into the toxic masculinity slip of not opening up even when asked. Eventually, one day, I just broke down sobbing. My girlfriend quickly got worried about me, and I just let the dam go. It all crumbled apart, and everything came out. How I always wanted a nuclear family, not a split one. Always wanted a happy home that wasn't mentally and emotionally hurtful. The one positive was my relationship that I made sure worked. It's been over 1 year for me and my girlfriend, and we have beautiful plans for Valentine's Day. Story 5. Not me, but my husband, and it is something he is still unlearning. He did not have the greatest of upbringing, and his parents were always begging and blaming for things and not receiving help. They haven't received help because they have asked for so much and haven't paid back. My husband saw this, and in his mind, he has to be independent to avoid being in the same situation. When we've asked his parents for help, even for the smallest of things like watching our daughter for a few hours, they make a big deal out of it. It's upsetting because he's surprised that my biological and step families have offered or even asked what we need because they know what kind of situation we're currently in. Yeah, in the next month or so, we're moving to ID and be a state away from his parents. They give me anxiety, and it boggles my mind how they have certain habits and yet crab about being complained to about said habits.
I think there are a lot of parents out there that struggle with dealing with teaching their child, like, how much self-sufficiency and how much asking for help is okay. And obviously some parents are going to have their own messed up ideas about, how much of either you're supposed to do. But like, I know with my dad and stepmom, they really tried to teach me to be self-sufficient. And in some of my early days when I made some mistakes, they basically left me like, hey, well, you're going to have to figure it out. You screwed up. And I did eventually learn my ways, but not before I screwed up a lot. I ruined my finances. I dropped out of college, all this stuff, because I didn't feel like I could go to them for help after that. And that's not on them. They've done so much good stuff, great parents in so many ways, but I look at that and go, yeah, I had a really hard time for so many years asking for help because of the way they treated that. And I'm glad that I'm not like that anymore.
Story 6. I'm learning to not make excuses and to not judge people so much. It's quite hard. My mother never pushed me in school or parented me really, and always made excuses when I didn't study enough or forgot about homework and would get mad at myself. Over time, I began to make excuses for everything, which is a horrible habit. I understand that she was doing it out of love, but still wasn't great. As for the second one, she most definitely inherited judging people constantly from her narc mother and judgmental as F family. I love them, but wow, they can be judgmental and care heavily about their looks. I honestly don't get why she's like that, seeing as she went from wealthy family to disability with a slob as a husband, which they still judge her for. At this point, though, I'll always be judged because of my scars, piercings, and gothic clothing, so I try to focus on myself. Story 7. As someone who was abused heavily by a narcissistic mother and almost lost my sister due to her abuse, I had to unlearn the idea that every family was broken and that we had to keep all the brokenness to ourselves. It wasn't until I was 16 and nearly lost my sister due to self-termination attempts that my mother never cared about and called her overdramatic. I knew that enough was enough and did everything in my power to get help. My mom has since died due to cancer, and my sister has gotten so much better and has unlearned many tendencies we developed from being raised by her. But to this day, my sister says that she wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for me, and my dad to this day keeps trying to make it up to both of us for being so wrong. Story 8. My mother put me in foster care as a teenager, so I unlearned everything pretty quickly since telling them how you're feeling will eventually almost immediately be used against you. LeVay was my role model for the longest time until I was punished for believing his ideals. Then I just became emotionless and quiet, and then they tried diagnosing me with being a psychopath, which in reality I just didn't tell them anything and didn't show any emotion because everything I said and did, whether publicly or privately, was going to be used in some way to punish me. Group homes suck. They claim they're helping the mentally handicapped, but they're just using us for a paycheck and very often a punching bag. Story 9. Concerning Story 2 from the original video, my wife still struggles with this issue of buying cheap stuff. Took almost a decade to get her to buy a good pair of shoes. She was shocked with how much less she dealt with back and knee pain and how much longer the shoes lasted by spending $20 to $30 more. The shoes were not the first issue that had to be dealt with. The TP was a major issue early on in the relationship. I would rather half starve than use cheap toilet paper. I don't care if I have to work a double shift, I'm buying the good stuff when it comes to butt wipes.
I had a coworker who she liked to fairly frequently say that you don't skimp on two things in life, bed sheets and butt wipe. But she said it in a more crude manner. And it's true. There are great ways to save money, and hey, if you can be kind of frugal, save money, I'm all for it. I'm like that in a lot of ways, but sometimes you gotta know the few things that are worth spending a little bit extra on because you're worth it.
Story 10. I had a lot to unlearn. My grandmother, who helped my mom raise me, taught me. A lot of crazy stuff like flossing would ruin my teeth and intercourse traffickers go after white blonde girls only. Even when I went to live with her when attending college, she had some strange ideas. Like, one time I was having issues with my allergies, so she blamed germ buildup in my hand wash only clothes along with roadkill germs from road work. She didn't want me going outside with wet hair either, so I had to wear a hoodie and rush quickly out the door as she would stop and lecture me about catching pneumonia. Story 11. Concerning Story 17 from the original video, my parents aren't hoarders, but they are one of the lower stages that I call collector. My mom has trouble getting rid of items that could be useful, so she has a shelf of glass jars from condiments, a pile of egg cartons, a cabinet full of shipping boxes, always goes through items I'm decluttering and either tries to convince me to keep half the stuff or takes it to put in Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. Keep in mind, I think all of those things are legit reasons to keep stuff, but there needs to be a limit of some kind. Biggest reason our house is cluttered, again on a normal scale but unnecessarily, is because my parents never make the time to go through various spots in the house and decide if something is being used/will be used in the near future. I ascribe to the it may be useful mentality, but have put rules in place so my space does not become unmanageable. Story 12. As a switch, I subbed for years because I was taught it was inappropriate and selfish to want to take control. Also, I once had a sergeant in the Marines who told me it was his car so he could do what he wanted, and seatbelts were a millennial BS when politely asked to put it on to stop the beeping noise. I told him he is a millennial, and he told me he was not. I told him that if I proved him wrong, he has to wear his seatbelt until the end of my contract, and that he can't hit me with an insubordination charge for holding him to it. He agreed. I was right. There was at least 3 occasions where I stubbornly stood in front of his truck and tapped my foot yelling, "You promised," after that. Yes, I was childish. Yes, I would absolutely do it again. Story 13. Story 1 from their original video hits hard. Kindness is infectious. With the world we live in today being so void of any charity or real empathetic and altruistic behavior from most, even the smallest little act of kindness and love can impact people in ways you couldn't possibly believe. One act of random kindness can turn a life around, especially when you're dealing with young people from rough backgrounds.
Seriously, folks, try and do one kind thing a day if you're able to, and also try and show kindness to people that you don't necessarily think deserve it, because sometimes in the moment you're angry with them for some reason or upset or whatever, and if you just act with kindness, sometimes you can kind of break through and get to a person. Obviously, not in every situation, protect yourself, be smart or whatever, but sometimes if it seems like a decent option or a reasonable option, it's a worthwhile one.
Story 14. I'd unlearned that my family was normal and making tiny mistakes was a bad thing. I grew up thinking the physical and mental abuse from my parents was normal, and I didn't realize that was abuse when I was younger. I thought every family was like mine. I thought I had to be the perfect child. Every mistake I made, such as spilling a drink, was met with extreme anger. Story 15. There were many things I needed to unlearn, not because of my parents, but because of my sisters. While they were growing up, they called shredded cheese sprinkle cheese, since they didn't know the proper term at the time, and just about a year or so ago, I used sprinkle cheese at Subway when I wanted the shredded mozzarella for a sandwich. I had to explain the story to the poor guy, and we both had a little laugh. Story 16. It's better to cancel plans / not show up than to show up late. My mom had social anxiety, hated being the center of attention, and was frequently bullied by the other moms in our church, so any event in which we were running late for, she'd decide it was better to just avoid all the anxiety and drama and not go. I was in my mid-20s before I was finally able to stop getting anxious at the idea of running 5 or 10 minutes behind schedule. And thankfully, Mom has been doing her part with a therapist to address her own issues, and she's conquered the habit too.
See, I had the opposite problem where my parents were always late. Like, we were always late to everything, and it drove me wild, and so I started becoming habitually early. But I was a person who'd show up too early to stuff for a while, and that's not great either, folks. Let me tell you, if you're invited over for like a little party or just to hang out or dinner, and you show up like half an hour early, that's not great for most people. It kind of sucks. Just try and be around on time or a little bit late typically, you know? That's better.
Story 17. My dad has me so convinced that the absolute only reason anyone would ever have intercourse is to try to have a baby. He convinced me so badly I can't help but think that in the back of my mind, even watching sitcoms and such. Makes being married very difficult as there's a lot of mental blocks to break down for intimate evenings each and every time. It's like a self-repairing wall that creeps up right after each time I do what other people find perfectly normal. Story 18. 1. My mom. You don't need to learn how to fight, just tell your bullies to stop or ignore them. It wasn't until after 3 years where I learned to hit them in their hard soft spots / pressure points. 2. Just leave it to God and He'll help you find the solutions. Needed therapy and I could never get requests for help taken seriously. 3. Treated like a fool and irresponsible just because I'm the youngest caused a lot of problems with confidence, self-esteem, and speaking / standing up for myself. Story 19. My family was very arrogant about mental health, and I thought depression was something you can just get over. My parents would tell me that you're sad all the time because you choose to be. I learned the hard way that was not the case. I don't resent them, though. Mental health was rarely talked about. It wasn't until late high school through early college years that we actually learned what it was.
I think there are a lot of folks, especially around my age, that have some pretty bad ideas about mental health and what it means to go to therapy. I definitely grew up where if you went to therapy, then there was something wrong with you or messed up or whatever. Not the case. Therapy can be great for just about anyone, folks, and especially if you are struggling, therapy is a very worthwhile thing to do. It doesn't say anything bad about you. In fact, going to therapy typically says something pretty good about you.
Story 20. My mom taught me never to fight back when I'm being bullied. It took a while for me to just make my own decision and fight back. I still lost 4 against 1, but it felt good to finally stand up to them. The other kids came to respect me after that. Story 21. Concerning Story 9 from the original video, I had a substitute teacher in high school who said that in his limited experience as a teacher, the most heartbreaking thing he'd seen was how many 15-year-old students are infinitely more mature and wiser than many of his 40-year-old colleagues. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.